My name is Dr. David Campt. I'm with the Dialogue Company and the Voice Project. Voice stands for Voters Organized to Influence Critical Elections. And I am grateful that you are interested in increasing the turnout of voters of color. In the video series you're about to watch, you'll learn some universal principles of persuasion adapted to the task of getting people to vote. It's presented in a way that's kind of universal and neutral, but I recognize that people of color have both additional challenges and additional opportunities as we do persuasive work. So I would encourage you as you watch it to think about how can I adapt this to be more, as they might have said, culturally competent, to be more culturally effective. And at the end of the video, I will give you my own thoughts about making those adaptations. I'm going to focus on the community I know best, black folks, but if you're Latino, if you're Asian, if you're Native American, you can think about similar issues for your own cultural group. I think if we adapt these universal principles to us, we'll be more effective. Thank you for wanting to improve our democracy and people of color's participation in it. This course consists of 9 short modules. Modules 1, 2, and 3 outline the context of the course. Module 1 is why this course is important. Module 2 is the theory of change. Module 3 is an explanation of the REACH method of managing a conversation. Modules 4 through 8 explain what you should do in each phase of the REACH method. Each has some homework that allows you to increase your skills. The REACH method is aimed at you helping nudge someone's motivation enough for them to make a light commitment to voting. Module 9 is the summary. We look back and then encourage you to get out there and do some work. Welcome to the Voice Project and our course on motivating discouraged voters. We believe that as many Americans as possible should vote, and we believe that we should all take responsibility to make sure that other people in our circle vote. We believe that to do that effectively, we need to use good skills of dialogue so those conversations about voting make people feel empowered and not diminished. We have a problem in this country with 100 million people not voting. That's one problem. A second problem is that we have too many people who vote because of what team they're on, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green. Too many people are voting because of their political identity. We need more people voting based on their values, and also more people talking about their values to other people. We're going to use our experience in dialogue, honed over a long time, to give you some skills and frameworks to help you have better conversations with somebody who's not inclined to vote, one of those 100 million people. We want you to have a better conversation, but also to be able to influence them to vote. Our intention is that through our lessons, you learn some important skills that'll be useful in any situation and maybe change somebody's voting behavior. America is number 26 out of 32 developed countries in their voting rate. It is important for us to do better. There are many problems related to this. There are many causes, but one of them is that we're doing a poor job of persuading people to vote. Our perspective is that to do a better job, we need skills of dialogue. If you're going to have an authentic dialogue with somebody, it's vital if you're going to persuade them. So we're going to teach you a method of dialogue that is useful in any situation and can certainly be used in light of persuasion. If you use this method successfully, you'll be able to move somebody from being a discouraged voter to somebody who's motivated enough to vote. But if you use this method, you will also likely change yourself, because the methods of dialogue have application not just for persuasion, but for any type of exchange between people. The method I'm going to teach you is called the REACH method. REACH stands for reflect, inquire, British spelling, agree, confess, and harmonize. We chose this word to help you remember, what am I trying to do? Oh yeah, I'm trying to reach somebody. I'm going to give you more detail about each of these steps in a subsequent module. The thing to know now is that this method is a best practice, and it's based on listening, humility, and compassion. There is way too much American on American conversational violence. Our goal is to stop that. We need to. We need to talk to each other better. Enemies of America are trying to take down our democracy. How are they doing that? They're taking advantage of the fact that we're a divided country. We're so divided that 81% of Americans think that political polarization is a problem. We're alienated from each other. And the sense of that seems to grow. Our enemies are leveraging that. As our enemies try to take down our democracy, we need to stand up for it. We need to talk to other people about whether they vote and how they vote, and do so in a way that brings us together and doesn't further divide us. If you learn these methods, that may take some practice, but if you learn them and start using them, not only will you strengthen our democracy, you will also strengthen your relationships. And that's good for humanity. This course is based on a few ideas, which I'm going to review so you can see how they all work together to constitute a theory of change of this course. This nation's really divided, but it is true that liberal and conservative people all need to talk to people in their circle, talk more about how people should vote. Not enough conservatives vote, not enough liberals vote. We all have an interest in that. But in our divided time, many people have decided that talking about politics is way too risky to their relationship. People have thought that if we talk about that, my relationship may fall apart. People lost friends over talking about politics. One result of that is that there is a whole lot of non-voters, about 60%, who have never been asked to vote and might if they were asked. This course is based on something called personal network canvassing. This involves everyday citizens like yourself talking to people in their own circle of influence and attempting to increase their motivation to vote. Now, this personal network canvassing is related to something that political operatives are now calling relational canvassing. In relational canvassing, people mobilize groups of people to phone bank, knock on doors. I miss doing that when everybody wasn't a vector of death, but people knocked on doors, they do phone banking now. They do that so other people can reach them, and they do that to talk about their concerns. They try to have a real, authentic connection. That's relational canvassing. This is related to that. You want to have a similar exchange, maybe even a longer one, because you're talking to somebody you already know. And the point is to try to understand their perspective, understand why they don't think voting is important, and then try to move them on that. The point is to do so in the context of an authentic dialogue. Now, doing this may be a little scary because it may go against a side of you or maybe even an agreement you have with somebody. We're not talking about politics because we might disagree. The reason we're promoting changing that is because talking to people is important. The methods here are grounded in compassion. They're grounded in authentic dialogue. You're not about to have an argument with somebody. We've structured the method to make it highly unlikely that if you actually do it, you will have a difficult exchange. Now, to do that, it requires some shifts on your part. You might need to do a rehearsal of these methods to train yourself because you're having conversations differently. But I'm confident that based on teaching these methods to thousands of people, if you try this approach, even if you don't move people on voting, you're likely to have a relationship strengthening experience. Here's what turns out to be true. You can be motivated to do this method because you really want to get more people to vote your way. You can do this method because you want to improve democracy and you don't care who votes more. Or you can do this method because you want to create a more compassionate world. The truth is, it doesn't really matter. We all end in the same place. If you do these methods, which are about compassion and persuasion, you will have a good chance of persuading somebody. You will change yourself, and you will change your own communication pattern. You will improve your relationships because you will create a compassion-based, authentic encounter. You want to get out there and do it, but please know you're going to change, they might change, and all of this is going to strengthen our democracy. The dialogue method we teach to negotiate differences is called the REACH method. REACH is an acronym. Each letter stands for one of the 5 steps of the model. R is for reflect, which means taking a moment to get ready for a different kind of conversation. As I will explain, the reflect step also involves some sub-steps that start with R. Relax. Before you have a conversation with somebody and there's disagreement in it, it's valuable to take an active step to try to relax as much as possible. It can be as simple as taking a breath or something more complicated, but it's important to relax. It is also important to rekindle and remind yourself of the affection or connection you have with the person that you're trying to have a conversation with around disagreement. It is important to rekindle your affection or connection with the person because you're trying to have a conversation around disagreement. It's also important to just reflect, to bring to mind that you're having a conversation with a strategy and you're not just reacting. So that's the R. The E stands for inquire, which means to ask questions, one or more of them, to give the person to talk about their perspective so you can make sure they feel heard. Inquire means ask a question or multiple questions so you can understand their point of view. It's best if you can get them to elicit a story that not just reveals their opinion, but their values. And even better is to have them tell you an experience that illustrates their point of view. You want to do that from a stance of empathizing, because with empathy, it's easier to negotiate their decisions and your decisions. It'll be easier to get them to go with your point of view later if you've empathized with them first. Okay, R-E. A, agree. This includes both alignment and acceptance. There's two levels of this. Depending on what they said in the inquire step, you want to convey that you have some alignment with them on goals or emotions or values for society. This helps you have a valuable connection and build trust. By focusing on alignment, you put them in a position to listen to you. But you also want to convey that you accept them, that you're not judging them or rejecting them. Doing this is critical to maximize the influence that you can have on them. R-E-A-C, the confess step. This is where you tell them a story to show them that you accept them. And you might have some alignment with them. Your goal is to confess, to tell a personal story that shows you've been where they are. It might not have been about voting, but it might have been. But your objective is to tell them a story so they really feel at a heart level that you're with them and not judging them. The final step is H, harmonize. This is where you try to influence them. This is where you say that their current perspective about voting might not need to be completely obliterated, but it can exist alongside of a different way of thinking about it, which can include a decision to vote. As we will discuss, you're showing them a bridge between their current thinking and new thinking, which includes a motivation to vote. Your goal is to convey you understand where they have been, but now you're inviting them to a new way of thinking. There's good science behind all of these steps. I'll go through this briefly. When you're trying to change somebody's point of view, especially around an election, our natural tendency is to get energized and fired up. But it turns out that relaxing is important. Being centered and calm helps you make better conversational choices. It helps the other person become less defensive. When we disagree with someone, our impulse is to start telling them that they're wrong in hopes they'll concede to our superior logic. But in fact, inquiring about what someone else thinks has shown in a lot of studies to increase the likelihood that they will take your perspective seriously. Agree. Our natural tendency is to tell someone who disagrees with us they're completely wrong. We don't want to concede anything because we feel that this weakens our position. In reality, the parts of our brain that are activated when we're under physical threat also get activated when we think our opinions are under attack. So you want to show agreement because this lessens this and tamps down the part of their brain that sees you as a threat. Confess. When you're trying to influence someone, we often think we need to completely reject their position. It turns out that the best way to influence somebody is to demonstrate that we understand where they are. What this does, especially if we do it through a story, is it fires up a part of our brain called mirror neurons. And that's where they try to feel what we're feeling if they feel identified with us. The confess step fires that up. Then you try to move them with the harmonize step by telling them a story that shows how you have gone from where they were to some new place. In general, people don't like to be corrected, but they don't mind learning. So this is why you do all of this through a story that invites them to a new point of view that doesn't obliterate their point of view. Homework. We're asking you to occupy conversations in a very different way than you're likely to do. This is not people's natural inclination. Almost every step is different than what we naturally do. So we want you to be effective. We want you to get out there and work, but we want you to be effective. So we're going to give you homework at each step so you can practice in a setting where you're not trying to influence somebody, just to feel how it is to relate to conversations differently. We know from past experience that you're more likely to be successful if you do a little bit of rehearsal and practice before you get out there and try to have a conversation to really influence somebody. All right, enough of these preliminaries. We hope that you're ready for some personal network canvassing. The idea of talking to somebody about what they believe when it's different than yours might be scary. But here's what's important to remember. We're teaching you a method that is based on listening, compassion, and humility. So if your conversation has even a little of these qualities, you are not likely to cause harm to people or your relationships. You're likely to do good for yourself, for the other person, and for the world. So, you're fired up about the election, and you're about to have a conversation with somebody who you suspect or know is a likely non-voter. They might even be registered. You're doing this because you care about the election. You're fired up and ready to go. But as you approach the conversation with one person, that level of energy is not helping you. You need to get your mind right for this conversation, and that's where the reflect step comes in. It also stands for relax and rekindle. Let's talk about all of them. Relax. Our learners have found that you can get some benefit from relaxation methods that might take only a minute or two, the time it takes to go to the bathroom. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a screenshot of these methods. If you're on our learning platform, you can download it. The critical thing is to actually try these methods, to try methods that teach you how to relax, and you can learn what really works for you. Rekindle. It's important to fill your heart up with positive things about them. You're about to have a conversation about whether they vote or not, and you really think they should. It is useful to remember a positive moment you have with them, or some skill they have that you don't and you admire. On the screen, you can see a bunch of what might be called heart openers. If you're on a learning platform, you can see them there. The goal is to fill up your heart with positive energy about them, which will infuse the rest of the conversation. Reflect. Most of us don't have conversations with a strategy, we just react. What's important to get comfortable doing is to be authentic in the conversation, but to remember, I'm doing a strategy. I'm not just reacting. I'm actually managing this conversation in an active way. So what's useful to practice is the mindset of approaching conversations this way. Homework. Choose one of the relaxation methods over the next couple of days. Try them for 3, 4, or 5 minutes and see what happens. And then try to reduce the time. That's one piece of homework. The second has to do with rekindle. At some point in the conversation, in the next couple of days, doesn't have to be about politics, just do a heart opener and see what happens. This could be with somebody in your family, a friend. Just purposefully fill up your heart with good feelings about them and see what happens to you. Filling your heart up with compassion for somebody is not going to hurt you, but figuring out which method is best is going to help you in a conversation where you're trying to influence somebody. Your overall objective in the inquire step is to ask questions, to try to understand the person, and to let them know you really are listening to them. I will discuss different aspects of this process. The first thing you want to do is to find out how likely they are to vote, and also perhaps how they feel about various candidates. Here's how I do that. I typically ask people, I'm curious about how you feel about the election. I'm wondering, how do you rate your support for candidate X, high, medium, or low? And also, how likely are you to vote? Likely, so-so, or unlikely. Now that sounds a little nerdy, but people usually respond positively. And in my head, I have a little 3x3 grid with the candidate on one axis and the voting thing on the other one. Depending on what they say, I might shift my conversation strategy. So I might find, for example, they're unlikely to vote, but prefer a candidate that I don't like. Now, if you find that out, you have to make a decision on what you do with that. Personally, I think more Americans need to be voting. So I advocate for still using these methods, even if people are voting for candidates that I don't like, because it's important that people vote. But you got to think that through for yourself. The rest of the method we're discussing in this course is assuming that their likelihood of voting is so-so or unlikely. Your objective in all of this is to increase their commitment to vote, and maybe by the end of the process, you will get them to make a soft commitment to you to vote. Here's the critical thing. Do not get preachy or judgmental. Yes, we want them to vote, and you think voting is good for democracy and voting is good for your cause. But the critical thing, once they tell you they're not likely to vote or only so-so, is to not get preachy and judgmental. If you're going to maximize your chance of influence, you want to convey that you're not doing that. We discussed this in the accept step, but this is so critical if you're going to have influence. So they tell you about how they feel about voting. There's one more question to ask. Something like this. That's interesting. I was wondering, what are the issues you care about most in society? So basically you shift from the question whether they're voting, who they're voting for, to what are the issues that they care about. Now you want to give some room in this conversation to talk about their issues of concern. It's okay to ask why they care so much about that. That's perfectly fine. Let them express themselves so they really feel heard. But you're still keeping in mind you're trying to move this conversation someplace. Take a good mental note of what they care about. Don't let it just wash through you, because you're going to come back to that in the harmonize step. Where are you trying to go with this? After you find out what they care about, you want to come back to the topic of voting. Now, you don't want to cross-examine them and convey you're judging them. What you want to do is to understand what is driving their shakiness around voting, or their decision not to vote. Now, some experts in psychology say that it is not useful to ask them to clarify that. Better is to go past that, is to ask a question that gets them to tell you a story about their decision not to vote. You want them to tell you about a prior experience that is linked to their perspective about not voting. This might sound something like this. I'm really struck by your perspective about voting. I'm curious to know about things that have happened to you that make you see it that way. I know many people have had registration experiences that were just so headachy they didn't want to do it. I know other folks who were deeply disappointed about the results of an election and they didn't want to vote again. So I'm curious to know about something that happened to you that affects how you see voting right now. Now notice, I gave different possibilities. So I'm showing them that I'm not trying to make any assumptions. I'm actually curious about them. It's important that your nonverbals convey a lack of judgment. You're trying to get them to talk about how they feel about voting in an honest way. In the learning platform, you'll see various tips about how to listen empathetically. You'll also see them on the screen. Homework. Find a comfortable way of inquiring about their likelihood of voting. You might try the method I talked about with the 3x3 matrix I talked about. See how that works for you. I'd suggest you do this with somebody you're not trying to influence. Just practice asking the question, so by the time you get to somebody you're trying to influence, the question comes out of your mouth in a smooth way. You found out how you want to ask that question. Practice this on other people who you don't care about influencing, so you can just get comfortable with the question. Second point, asking for an experience related to their point of view. A lot of people have never done that. This is also something to practice, maybe even on issues not related to politics. You want to experiment with different ways of asking the question to see how to go from somebody saying an opinion to a story about their opinion. Finally, we all need more listening in this world. So it's useful to look at the listening tips, choose one or two you might like, and practice them in a conversation where there's nothing on the line. You're not trying to influence anybody, you're just practicing your listening muscle and see which method helps you do that the best. The agree step, your objective is to convey verbally that you're not dismissing their point of view. There's two levels of this. One might be called alignment. Remember, they've expressed things that they care about in society. They might have expressed values when they did that. So one thing you can do is to meet them at the level of alignment on values or their emotions or their goals. So just conveying that you agree with them on some of those things is important and can be helpful in building the bridge between you. So that alignment about things you care about is important to spend time on to let it breathe before you move forward. But in truth, the more important thing here, and the harder one for you to do, given you're trying to change them, is to convey acceptance. You want to find a way to communicate some level of acceptance of the thing at the heart of their story about why they don't vote. Now, one way to do that is to really get clear on what is the level of disempowerment here. I'm going to give you some common examples of where that disempowerment comes from. It might be cynicism, like the person can't make a difference. It might be lack of information, like I don't understand enough about it to vote. It might be apathy, as in I don't really care. It could be identity, like I'm not that type of person. It could be responsibility, like I know I should, but I just don't. All of those are variations of why people feel disempowered. Now, you're not trying to agree with them, but you're trying to convey that you accept their feelings of disempowerment. You're trying to convey you're not rejecting them as people or thinking their perspective is crazy. You're not judging them. You're going to try to move them forward, but your goal is to make sure they understand you accept them. You might do that by paraphrasing. So it might be something like, sounds like you're really frustrated. Sounds like you don't feel responsible. Sounds like you're feeling kind of cynical. Whatever it is, paraphrase it back to them and do so in a non-judgmental way so they know you're accepting them and you're not trying to change them at that moment. You're taking in their point of view. Homework. Think of two of the feelings I just outlined. They were on the screen, and do some practicing of telling a story about when you felt that. We want you to do that in advance because it helps you for the next section, which is all on confessing. Do a little thinking about that. You're a committed voter, so it's hard to identify with those feelings. Here's what to remember. It doesn't have to be about voting. If you've ever felt you were in an organization and you didn't want to take responsibility, or if you felt cynical, or you felt like what I do doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be about voting, but start practicing thinking about and telling those stories of disempowerment. You felt disempowered at some point. It'll be useful for you to practice confessing that, because when you are trying to reach somebody, it's important that they know you really are not judging them, that you share that common feeling that they have about not voting. You're going to move them, but you want to identify with them before you do that. The confess step. Here is the place where you build that heart-level connection. Your goal is to admit to feeling something like they have felt. It doesn't have to be about voting, but what you want to do is to go past the agree step where you tell them that you understand them and show them through a story. You might want to tell them a story about a time you didn't take responsibility for your situation, or a time when you were cynical, or a time when you said, I'm just not a leader, I'm not going to do anything, or a time when you might have said, my perspective here doesn't matter. The point is, you want to convey through a story that you understand where they're coming from, that you have been there. It could be it's in the past, or it could be an occasional feeling that happens now and then in your life. Again, it doesn't have to be about voting, but your objective is to make sure that they understand you understand that feeling. Homework. How do you prepare for this? I would suggest you look at the list of possible reasons for not voting and think about ones you haven't thought of already. Try to come up with more stories, because you don't know what this person is going to tell you, but you want to be able to respond with a story about a time in which you felt disempowered. The point of confessing is that it's very important for them to feel like you get them. And that's going to be vital in order for you to move them from that, which you'll do in the harmonized step. Now we're at the money step. You've reflected, you've inquired, you've agreed, you've confessed. Now it's time to try to move them. It's time to harmonize. There's three aspects of harmonizing. One aspect is drawing a connection between the issues they care about and voting. To remind them, if they care about education, that who's in office affects education policy. To remind them, if they care about climate change, who's in office affects that too. You want to make the connection as best you can between the issues they care about and voting. As important is you're telling your personal story about how you came out of the feeling of being disempowered. You need to let them know that it's possible to go from feeling disempowered to empowered, whether the disempowerment was based on cynicism or apathy or whatever. They need to hear from you about how you did that. What's important is that you convey how that happened for you. What was the realization that you had? What was the experience you had that helped you move from frustration or from lack of responsibility to some new place? They need to see that it's possible. They also need to see that you still respect their point of view, but you had that, but they need to see how it's possible to move forward. And that is the harmony that you're trying to help them see. There's a link between what they feel and what they could feel, and you embody that. They need to see the model of that, and you are that model. Essentially, you are saying, I have gotten out of the place you're in and gone on to a place I like more. And then you want to link that back to voting, basically saying they should do that because of the issues that they care about. Now, you're going to have to make a decision about which of those happen first, but it's important to do both of those things. We're going to close off the harmonize step by doing some things which are known to help nudge people towards voting. I'll list them. These are all known by voting professionals. Tell them that many other people are voting. It turns out that humans are social creatures, and if we think more people are voting, and a lot of people are voting, we're more likely to vote. You can employ the use it or lose it strategy. As we see from efforts to depress voting, our voting rights are on some level at risk. They're not assured. So the use it or lose it argument can be effective. Raise the issue of voting on behalf of others. If they care about children or the disabled or people who've been to prison, it can be useful to remind them they can vote on behalf of people they care about. Finally, think about whether you want to ask them to vote as a favor to you. That's often not employed, but when it is employed, it often works. A big portion of people have never been asked to vote. Voting is not that difficult, so consider asking them to vote as a favor to you. Your goal is to nudge them towards a light commitment to vote. If you can't get that, just nudge them toward the admission that they will at least consider it. You want to tell them you're going to check back with them. People who study voting have found that if you're just nudging people towards considering voting, or if they commit to voting, knowing you're going to check back with them actually affects their voting behavior. You want to make that ask, and you want to get follow-up. Now, this whole sequence might happen in one conversation or might not. You need to be discerning about how much you push people, about your time, and about whether they feel like you're hassling them. But the whole purpose of personal network canvassing is that we're leveraging our connection with people we know in service of strengthening our democracy. Homework. Think about a time in which you came out of that feeling of disempowerment and practice telling that. You want to practice telling that with people that you're not trying to influence to get more comfortable telling it. Remember, your goal is to try to get them to commit, at least lightly, to voting or at least considering voting. But remember, by doing this, you're strengthening democracy. You're even strengthening your relationship with the person because you've had an encounter with their feelings of disempowerment and invited them out of that after really listening. So, it's time to get to work. If you're watching this, it's because you have done the steps in this process and you have moved somebody from a shaky commitment to voting or even a commitment to not vote to at least a mild commitment to consider it. Kudos to you. So I'm now going to briefly review some well-known steps among voting specialists about what to do to further solidify their commitment. First, as you talk with them about what they're doing, talk about them not as somebody who votes, but as a voter. So now that you're a voter, let's talk about how we're going to make that happen. There's good research that shows that the frame of you're a voter as opposed to the frame of someone who votes, the identity frame is effective in changing behavior. So shift the language to you're a voter and not just someone who votes. Now this is your friend. You're doing personal network canvassing. So you need to consider doing some intensive hand-holding to walk them through the process. Remember, they've made a light commitment or a commitment, but still you might need to hold their hand to get them to vote. You might need to help them register online. You might need to take them to the polling place. You might need to do whatever it takes. You want to express your concern for them and your commitment to following through. And you don't want to let their mismanagement of logistics get in the way now that you've moved them. You might want to register with them, provide them with information about it. If they're a self-starter, it might be useful for you to make clear to them what they have to do. Especially now, with many people registering online and avoid going to the polls, there's extra steps in absentee voting. Make it clear what they are so they're more likely to do it. The most important thing to move somebody from a light commitment to actually voting, according to voting professionals, is to make a concrete plan. If they're going to vote in person, have a conversation about what time they're going to go and how they're going to get there. You're going to catch the bus? What bus? Talk all of that through. One of the commonly talked about findings among voting professionals is that the making of a concrete plan is a very powerful step to moving somebody from I might vote to I'm going to vote. As I said earlier, actually follow up with them. If people think that somebody's going to follow up with them, they're much more likely to vote. So commit to doing it and then actually do it. If you're still in the run-up phase and they've only told you they consider voting, actually check back with them. That has a lot of impact. But overall, congratulations. You are doing your part for democracy. You've had a conversation with them, or more than one conversation, about the thing that is most precious to democracy, and that is people's participation. Congratulations to you for undermining the very unfortunate silence we have about talking about politics that we've fallen into as Americans. 100 million people are not voting. Arguably, this is the biggest voting bloc out there. So engaging in this process, you are not only deepening your relationship with somebody you love or somebody you like, you're strengthening democracy. I want to thank you so much for doing your part. Thanks for watching the lesson on improving people's tendency to vote. I hope as you watched it, you were doing your own thinking about how you might adapt this to your particular cultural milieu. I'm going to offer some thoughts about that. So this overall video is for people of color, but I know most about black folks, so my examples will be from that perspective. I want to encourage you to think about who your target is. Okay, the relax step. Because of the dire situation facing black communities, it is easy to not be relaxed. It is easy to be fired up. It is easy to look at this conversation as really important and to bring a level of energy and urgency to it that is not helpful to this method. So I really want to underscore the importance of taking time to find out where is your woosah so you can approach this from a relaxed standpoint and be strategic and discerning. The inquire step. As a general matter, I think we need more curiosity, certainly in the black community. A lot of us, especially those who are more politically active, think we really do know better than other people, and it might be difficult for us to really stop and get curious and get listening and get empathetic, and that's critical to this method. So I just want to underscore, given the different perspectives and different levels of sophistication, arguably, it's important to recognize that everybody's smart, we all have something to learn, and so by stopping and asking questions and really listening, not only is it good for them, it's also good for you. Agree. As a general proposition, people of color and black folks that I know about do a good job of trying to create a space where everybody has some value. But I think that around this voting question, it can be hard for us to try to at least even temporarily accommodate, like there's some agreement with somebody who doesn't want to vote. It's hard to do that because we know how dire a situation is. So I would encourage you to practice the agree step, agreeing with some part of somebody's position you overall don't agree with, because this step is important. Confess. Many of us have felt alienated, cynical, not responsible. That's just not for me. So this shouldn't be too difficult if you felt like that. That's the task of the step. But here's what I would say. If you felt like that because of racial discrimination and the other person didn't bring that up when they said it, feel free to bring that up. Because it could be that they didn't bring it up because they didn't know whether you were comfortable with that. So if your feeling of disempowerment was based on some part in race, feel free to racialize that because they might feel like that too, and that strengthens it, and it's true for you. The harmonize. For a long time, because of our situation, black folks have been telling the story of how I got over, how I stepped forward, how I got out of a degraded state. So this shouldn't be too difficult, and so you should feel free to racialize that. Your empowerment story is an important story for them to hear. Now, in the harmonize step and in the commitment step afterwards, I talked about how to move somebody forward from a small commitment to, or some ambivalence to a real commitment. Here's what you might want to think about bringing up. There's black voter suppression. That's a real thing. So the whole notion that use it or lose it has a whole different kind of a salience for people of color because people are trying to take that vote away. So feel free to bring that up. The notion that there are people who we should vote on behalf of is also useful to think about, whether it's felons or whether it's our ancestors. I think that that has a whole additional level of cultural resonance that other groups don't have because they haven't had to face that. So do it for your grandmama because she fought and died and she couldn't do it is an argument that can be very powerful. Another thing to think about in terms of those kind of arguments is that black voter turnout was higher than white voter turnout in 2012 and 2016. And given the dire nature of things, that needs to happen again. So the whole notion that everybody's doing it, you should do it, well, that can be particularly racialized in a way that might bolster your argument. So the point is that you can feel free to customize these general ideas to your particular cultural setting, and you should do that. This election is very important to everybody, and particularly to people of color. So I just want to encourage you to call on all manner of tools as you try to encourage people in your circle to vote. We got to get past that idea that we can't talk about these issues. It's too important. We need to talk about them. Thank you so much. Good luck in your efforts to get people to vote.